What's up, everyone? And if you haven't guessed from the title, this is the deck profile of my almost top in my Las Vegas regional. Fortunately, I got so close, but I got the 33rd place, which is unfortunate, but sometimes that's just how it is. But it doesn't change anything that this deck is a monster. Because in addition to how well it performed in the regionals, I've also topped 3 consecutive locals with this deck. So this deck is definitely a powerhouse, and a lot of people really underestimate it, and it's definitely been showing its head. Like, I've been going against the best decks and destroying them. Branded Despia means nothing to this deck. And since this is a topping deck list, I'm going to do the side deck as well, because that is very important. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, up to the Vegas Regional, I was debating on what deck I was going to play. Like, to me, Labyrinth was one of my front runners because I was pretty familiar with the deck and it was probably the best deck I had. And then I just one day decided to test generators just to see what they had, and it performed very well. Like, I rarely get blown out with this deck. And I decided to play generators at the regionals, and it did pretty well. The only decks it lost to was Labyrinth, which, not gonna lie, I don't know how he was able to put up a big board on my turn with the trap-based deck. I guess he just opened the God tier hand. And also lost to Dark Worlds, which I got my hand ripped. And Tearlaments, because of course. So let's just get right into the deck profile. I got 3 copies of Vala. Vala is one of the newer cards, which is an insane card. Both of the new cards for this deck are just very good, because Vala can special summon itself from hand or graveyard by discarding a generator card from the hand. And on summon, you can special summon 1 generator monster from hand or grave. And that's definitely really, really good. So that basically means you can make Leviathan turn 1. And before, when you just had to run as little generators as possible and summon them through the field spell, you don't really need the field spell as much. Granted, you still need the field spell quite a lot, but at least with Vala, even if you don't have the field spell, you can still play to an extent. Next, I run 3 Lopter. Basically one of the heart and souls of this deck. Lopter has a quick effect to tribute a generator to special summon a level 9 generator from your deck, which is definitely really good because this gets you access to any generators. And one cool thing with this combined with Vala is really good because you could use the effect of Vala, pitch Lopter, special the Vala, effect of Vala, special Lopter from the grave, then use the effect of Lopter to special another one of your generators. So you can just make Leviathan turn 1, or if you want to go into the Enteroblathnier or some other rank 9 play, that is perfectly a solid option. Also play 2 Mardell. Originally I was playing 1 Mardell and 1 of the Boss of Iron, but I very rarely summon the Boss of Irons, though. I ended up just cutting it for a second Mardell, because Mardell is your searcher. Whenever Mardell is normal special summon, you can add 1 generator card or 1 plant monster. But it's going to always be a generator card because you don't play any other plant monsters outside of Mardell. And you're not going to use Mardell to search Mardell. Also in Har. Har's really cool. It's an Omni-Negate, tribute 2 generators, or spellcaster monsters to well, when your opponent activates a monster or spell card or trap or whatever, you contribute 2 generator cards or spellcasters to negate the activation if you do destroy it. And Har has an additional effect. So if a card is added from your opponent's hand or opponent's deck to your hand, then you can make them send 1 monster from hand or grave to the field. And that can be pretty, or not, hand or grave to the field. And I can definitely interrupt plays, so definitely really good. Also got the one Edgarda. Edgarda, tribute 2 to banish the card on the field. Boss of Ice. My opponent special summons a monster, negate the summon. Hela, tribute to special a generator. And that's more or less it for the generator line. You don't really run a whole lot because the more generators you run, the more the hands can get kind of bricky. These are the main ones you'd want to run. Next, I run 2 Diviner. Diviner is a really solid card in this deck. For me, it serves 2 purposes. One, it's a hand trap bait. Because a lot of times when I normal summon Diviner, they'll Ash it or Emperor or Valor or whatever. And I'm just laughing. That Diviner wasn't really needed. Sometimes it can be needed if you have a less than desirable hand, but if you have a, let's say, Lopter and Diviner, and maybe a Vala or something like that, then you can just use Diviner as an Ash bait, while you can just then safely resolve your Vala and Lopter. Additionally, you can also send a fairy from the extra deck to the grave as well, which, attests as a fairy. Surprisingly, I don't know how it's a fairy, but it's a fairy. Also run 2 Ash. I want to have as much consistency as possible, so I only ran Ash at 2 copies, because I didn't really want to run into the chances where I open 2 Ash, because sometimes if I open 2 Ash and then, let's say, Lightning Storm, Monstrosity, and Boss Room, and that's my hand, I can't really do anything. So at least want to have as few bricks as possible. And against some decks, Ash just doesn't really do enough. That really depends on the deck. Like Dark World, I always side Ash out because a single Ash does nothing to that deck. Moving to the spells, you got the very important Generator Boss Stage. Boss Stage is really good. When your opponent adds a card from their deck to their hand, you can special summon a generator from your deck. And that includes Draw Phase, because Draw Phase is still technically adding a card to their opponent's hand. So the really cool thing is that works around a lot of stuff, because unless they have a quick effect or a hand trap, Boss Stage is going to resolve. And additionally, when you summon a generator on your opponent's turn, you can summon generator tokens, maxing out your field. Unfortunately, they have to be in attack, but it's not really too much of a downside, because usually you'll just tribute those tokens for the cost of the generator monster's effects. Also running 1 Terraforming. Also run 1 Generator Boss Quest. Honestly, this is one I am considering maybe cutting. More or less just because oftentimes I sided it out for more impactful cards, because sure, Boss Quest is cool. It gets you to the boss room and the boss fight, but there's only certain times where I need those. A lot of times I don't really need the boss room and the boss fight. If I have them, that's cool. But if I don't, I can search them off of Mardell. That's not really too hard anymore. So honestly, this is a card I may cut. I don't know what for. Maybe another Diviner. Maybe another hand trap. Who knows? Next is a card that is very, very insane. World Legacy Monstrosity. Basically, you can special summon a level 9 monster from your hand, or target a level 9 monster you control. Special summon from your deck 2 level 9 monsters with different original types and attributes, but they cannot attack and are destroyed on end phase. This card is insane. If generators ever become a very popular meta deck, then this card is going to get banned, because it just summons 2 generators for free. It doesn't even negate their effects. And that's just absolutely insane. Next, I run 2 Pot of Prosperity. Prosperity is definitely really good. Well, yes, it can kind of conflict with the Boss of Eternity to an extent. I wouldn't say to enough of an extent not to run it, because the ability to just search through and pick your cards, or at least from the top 6 you draw, it's pretty good. And there's sometimes where I don't really even need a Prosperity, and I'll just activate it just to look at the top 3 and maybe add a little bit more. Next, I run 3 Lightning Storm. Originally, I was running 3 Nibiru in the main deck and 3 Lightning Storm, or 3 Nibiru, 2 Lightning Storm, but Lightning Storm's just done a lot more, because Nibiru, with it being very popular in this format, a lot of people are playing around it, and there are some decks that can play around it very easily, like Branded Despia. Labyrinth doesn't care. Traptrix doesn't care. Dark World really doesn't care either. But Lightning Storm can hit those decks a lot harder. It may force them to use a trap too early, or you could just clear the board for an OTK, which this deck can do fairly easy. Next, I run 1 Monster Reborn. Honestly, this is a card I still don't get why people don't run it. It's a free extender, and especially in this deck, that is definitely really good. Let's say, for example, the monsters I have are Mardell and Vala. By using Monster Reborn, summoning another from the grave, that will boost my Eternity by 1,000, and if I have Leviathan on the field, instead of eating up 2 monsters, I can eat up 3. Or additionally, if I use the effect of Vala to special assault, but I didn't have any targets to summon Vala with, I can use that Monster Reborn on Vala later on to summon her back, and then activate her effect that time. Like, Monster Born is just an all-around very useful card. Also run one Call by the Grave for the hand traps, and honestly, going against Dark World, it's definitely coming pretty well at just getting rid of like the Rainbow or the Grapha. Moving on to the traps, I run 3 Skill Drain. This deck works really well under Skill Drain, considering the boss stage each turn can just summon more generators. Not to mention the generators themselves, well, most of them, like the Har, Hela, Utgarda, and Boss of Ice, and the Lothar, actually, all tribute summon themselves to activate their effects. Well, it doesn't have to be themselves, but basically, they contribute for cost and work well under Skill Drain. Same goes for Leviathan. It tributes for cost, so you can just tribute for cost, go into the Boss of Eternity, and then just swallow up your own Skill Drain if you don't need it anymore. I also run the 1 Boss Room. Boss Room does come in clutch a lot of times, but very situationally. When your opponent activates a card or effect in response to the activation of your generator card or effect, you can discard 1 card. Your opponent's activated effect becomes each player draws 1 card. So it's kind of like a counter to hand traps in a way. Or if they try to negate something, you can just essentially change that negate to a draw 1. Also run the 1 Boss Fight. Boss Fight is like Metaverse, but makes your opponents draw a card, which will just immediately trigger the boss stage. Because one thing I actually did mention, boss stage, not a hard once per turn, only a soft once per turn. So the more boss stages I activate in a turn, the more I can use its effect. Speaking of Metaverse, I do run a copy of that as well. And lastly, I run 2 copies of Infinite Impermanence. Moving on to the extra deck. This card is insane. I'm not saying that lightly. Leviathan is the card that really makes this deck work so well. Because as a quick effect, where it can tribute itself to special summon 1 non-fairy generator XYZ monster for every extra deck. Then you can attach cards from any field and graveyards to that special summon monster. So let's say you have, say for example, that you have Mardell, Utgarda, and Vol on the field. You just use these 3 to go into the Leviathan. Then use the Leviathan's quick effect to tribute itself to special summon the Boss of Eternity to your field, and you can take 3 cards from your opponent's grave or field to the Boss of Eternity as material. And there's not really a whole lot they can do to it. Like, they can't imperm it, they can't Valor it, because it tributes for cost. And a lot of time, people don't really know that. So when I summon the Boss of Eternity, they try to respond to it, not realizing that wasn't Boss of Eternity's effect, that was Leviathan. So not only does this card completely blindside people, but it can just eat things up, and not only that, it can also reduce our opponent's monsters by 1,000 attack and defense. Yeah, this card is just all around insane. Next, I run 3 Boss of Eternity. Boss of Eternity is not as powerful as Leviathan, I will say that, but it doesn't really need to be. So Boss of Eternity gains 1,000 attack for each, or 1,000 attack and defense for each material this card has, which can, I'd say, usually ends up being around 3 to 4 materials. So you usually have around 300 to 400,000 attack. And it's also got an additional effect to where you detach 1 material from this card. Each player draws 1 card, then attaches 1 card from the hand or field to this card, which will trigger the boss trigger the boss stage. Yeah, insane. Next, I run 9 Lives Cat. This was kind of like one of the later minute additions. I didn't really actually summon this once, so like if you want to take it out, it's also an option to be taken out. Your opponent cannot target other monsters you control that were special summoned from the graveyard with card effects. And you can detach material from this card. Target level 9 monster in your graveyard or a monster your opponent's graveyard, special summon it. This could be also pretty useful. Like, let's say I already made the Eternity, and I got 2 XYZ monster or 2 generator monsters on the field. I can just overlay them into 9 Lives Cat, then use the effective cat to summon one of them back. So it's got some uses, but they come up very rarely. Next, I run 1 Phantom Fortress after Blethner. Pretty good card. Basically, detach material from this card. You can either banish 1 random card from your opponent's hand, 1 card they control, 1 card from the graveyard, or the top card of your opponent's deck. I pretty much always go for the first effect to banish one from hand if I'm going first, but very rarely am I going to summon this over the Leviathan, and usually I'm going to summon this over the 9 Lives Cat. Also run the 1 Zeus. Now, when I think about the weaknesses of this deck, I can't really think of too many. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are saying in the comments right now, oh, what about Dimensional Barrier? That counts this deck. No, it does not. Because I am fully prepared for it. So that's why I run some links as well. Like the Unicorn, Phoenix, Access Code, and Apollousa. Actually, this actually came up once. One time my opponent activated D-Barrier on me. I'm just like, okay. Going to Phoenix, going to Unicorn, Access Code. And I basically won the game. Like, or if you're going first, or not really going first, but Apollousa is also another option as well. Next, I run 2 Elder Entity Tests, more or less just for the Diviner. I was kind of debating between Elder Entity Test or the Utopic Draco Future line, but either or, I figured that the test would come up slightly more, and it kind of did. I actually came up in the regional. Moving on to the side deck, I run 3 Droll Lockbird. More so for the Runic Naturia and Dark Worlds, because Ash and Imperm, they do nothing to Dark World, but Droll and Lockbird, they will completely end that deck. Next, I run 3 Nibiru. To be honest, I didn't really use Nibiru that much. I just didn't really feel like it was really ever needed. Next, I ran 3 Anti-Spell. Definitely came up against one of my matches, which was Drytron. And I can't really do much else after that. Same for a Dimensional Barrier. Also came up in my match against Drytron and several other duels as well. And lastly, 3 Evenly Match. To be honest, this side deck I feel covers the most variety. Like, say, Branded Despia. That and Anti-Spell covers it. Castura, that covers Castura. And I guess Nibiru can cover Castura as well. Runic Naturia, no problem. Sword Soul, got it covered. Like, this covers, I say, the majority of the meta. I guess the only problem was in the regional, I didn't really see a whole lot of the meta. Because my matches, I'll probably be mentioning it a lot more in the vlog. But it was like 2 Labyrinth, Drytron, Traptrix, Branded Despia, and Tearlaments. No Castura, no Sprite, no Runic Naturia. Like, I didn't even face those decks. I'm just like, I'm prepared for the regionals to have a lot of the best decks of the format, but I didn't really even see them. So that was a bit unfortunate. So what do you think of Generators? I think this is a really awesome deck, which I would definitely say it is. And it's definitely a deck that can clearly top it. I've been topping with it a lot lately. So let me know in the comments what you think of this deck, and I'll see you in the next video I make. Bye.